It's 2018, and you know what that means. It means more questions and more answers. And now that's when... There we go. All right, well, that worked. I had this all time with the intro, but it didn't work out just as I had hoped. How are you guys doing? How is everyone? Are we having anyone in the live chat already? Nope, not so far, but that's going to fill up real quickly, hopefully. Until then, let me just talk quickly about what's been happening with me. First of all, I went home for my parents for Christmas, and it was real nice. Yeah, all right, we got our first couple of people in the chat. And I've been working on the board game a little bit, mostly writing on the new book, which I'm thinking about maybe turning into 2 books because there's a lot of stuff already in it. So I'm not sure if it really qualifies for just 1 book. Maybe it's enough for really actually 2 books. So yes, that is an accent. My accent is German. And what else? I'm just really trying to stretch out the time until enough people are in the chat to ask me some friggin' questions finally. I also have been working on the ear training challenge, 30-day ear training challenge, which is going to release very soon this week for certain. We're also working on another podcast with Clifford, which is going to be coming out pretty soon as well. We also recorded one in December already, which is going to come out this week on Tove Lo's new album, Blue Lips. So that's going to be exciting. And most exciting of all, I mean, apart from me getting that silver award, which is somewhere back there. You can't see it from here, but that doesn't really matter. Apart from that, I'm starting a new YouTube show because I quit all of my jobs. So the only thing I'm doing right now is holistic songwriting. I mean, I'm still, writing songs and producing for other people. But apart from that, I don't think there's anything I really do except for this. So I want to start a new YouTube series so that I have 2. And my goals for 2018 are basically to release 1 new artist series every month and 1 new episode of that new series that I'm working on currently. So that would be 2 more shows every month that would come out this year. And now finally we have some new people. New room, studio space, says totally overrated. No, it's exactly the same room as before. There's just a whole lot of shit in the background, basically, because this is my recording setup. And I just filmed a couple of videos today, which you guys are going to see very shortly. So, yeah, this is what it looks like when I film stuff. In those orange boxes, that's just my stand for my teleprompter. So, hence the confusion. And this is new. I just got myself a Moog Voyager, which I'm super excited about. We can talk about it later if you guys want. Eminem Vivo says, this is not Eminem Vivo, is it? Do you like Eminem or Slim Shady? Right, it would be weird if Eminem asked that himself. I like Eminem a lot, actually. I think I have all of his albums except for the latest 2. I think I have every single one until the one after his comeback. What was that again? Recovery or something like that. I forgot what it's called. And I like him a lot, for sure. Like he's definitely one of my favorite rappers. Red Planet Productions says I should talk some German. Naja, worüber soll ich denn sprechen? Gib mir mal einen Anreiz, dann kann ich auch ein bisschen mehr auf Deutsch sprechen. Would you ever share your songwriting? Says this channel is no longer Mariah Watkins. Yes, that's something I've been really thinking about lately. And this new show is going to do a little bit of that, I guess. But it's something I'm really scared of. I've experimented with it. I just wrote something lately, and I did a screen recording of it. I had 2 problems with it. First of all, the screen recording didn't really work for some reason. Like it just capped it off after a while. Like after 40 minutes or so, it just the video just stopped working for some reason. I don't know what the problem is there. So that's a kind of technical problem. And more importantly, when I'm recording, I mean, songwriting is such a weird thing. It's really difficult if someone's watching. I don't really have a problem if someone's watching who's sitting right next to me, but if I feel like, oh, this has to go on YouTube, meaning like it has to be a certain size, a certain length. If this is turning into a 10-hour video, this is a little bit too much. So I'm trying to condense it down to at least 1.5 or 2 hours maximum. And that would be really challenging because my approach really is largely throwing shit at the wall and seeing if it sticks, So to use a very graphic analogy. Metaphor? Who's to say? Okay, so let's see. Could you do a video on Linkin Park? Well, Mudang Taping, it's your lucky day, because I can already announce that in season 2 of the artist series, I will be doing an episode on Linkin Park indeed. Because they used to be one of my favorite bands, so I think it's only fair to do one on them, because I know them fairly well, and I think I could talk a lot about there's a lot of interesting things I think we can talk about there. Would you do a video about Katy Perry? This would interest me very much, and I'm waiting. Not for the artist series, although maybe if she releases a new album for the album series, which I'm doing with Clifford. So the first season was all about pop artists. In the second season, I want to focus more on alternative artists, like rock heavy stuff, kind of. So not in the near future, but for an album series, I could totally see that happening. Could you please make a video on Lady Gaga's songwriting? Again, maybe for the album series, probably not for the artist series anytime soon. All right. All the ones except the ones when he got sober. Yeah, that's pretty much the albums that I like by Eminem. Those are like my favorite ones. The earlier ones, like the first 3, and then Eminem Show, I thought those were just amazing. All right. Oh, okay, I jumped again. All right. Okay, Eric Ross says, say I only have a simple melody of only 4 notes. How do you build a song from there? Build chords, progressions, percussion rhythms. Well, that's something I'm going to talk about in that new series, so maybe you should wait a little bit longer, although maybe that's going to take a while. So let's answer that real quick. Well, your melody already is going to be in a certain tonality, right? If you play a couple of notes, you say you have 4 notes, that's already going to suggest a certain key to you. So you basically know your 1 chord already. And the rest of the chords, you just kind of figure out. Just try out all of the different keys that you have in that key. So if you know you're in C major, then the other chords available to you are D minor, E minor, F, G, and A minor. And, there's other options, but those are the most important ones, and those are the ones I would try out first. And then see what chord progression, like what 4 chords sound the best against your melody, which give it the most interesting color, which gives you the best emotion when you listen to the melody. So that's kind of where I would start. So that's building chords, and in terms of percussion rhythms, really depends on your song, man. I mean, I usually start singing my melodies with a kind of groove in my head, so it's never just, I'm not just like playing notes without any rhythm. I always have a kind of groove going on in my head while I'm singing, while I'm coming up with melodies. All right. Totally Overrated says, you need someone to sit with you, a friend to capture reactions for the songwriting videos. Yeah, that would be totally what I'd need, man. That would be so perfect. Totally. That would be really exactly what I'm looking for. That's a good idea. That's a really good idea. Maybe I'll do something with that. Sam Knock says, other YouTube channels you are a fan of? Well, I really like 12 Tone. I watch his stuff a lot. Obviously, Adam Neely. Andrew Huang is fun. And then there's a lot of like board game channels, because I'm a big board gamer in my spare time. Vox has some really, really good stuff. Their Earworm stuff is fantastic. Like they have a series called Earworm, but their other stuff as well is just fantastic. TED, obviously, but everyone knows TED. Let me think of one clever one. Well, Tim Ferriss, I really like. He's got some really, really good stuff on his YouTube channel, including the podcasts, which are just mental. That's pretty much it. Like, those are the ones I watch most frequently, I think. There's a couple ones like with math, riddles, and stuff like that that I'm kind of like, I do those every morning to just like sort of get my head running and stuff like that. Yeah, anyways. So are you going to do Green Day with your new artist series, says Michael Hinty. Was Green Day on the list? I'm not sure, because I basically was just looking at all the different suggestions that people sent through the comments on my YouTube videos, on my previous YouTube videos, and I kind of gave them grades based on how many times they had been asked for, and I picked 10 those were the ones that people asked for the most, and those are the ones that are going to be in season 2. Would you ever collaborate with someone else on a book, says Paige Rebel? I would. I'm open to it. If the right opportunity comes along, absolutely. Yeah. HK says, this is an interesting question. Is a big, catchy chorus still the most desirable goal for a songwriter to achieve? This is a really interesting question because it's something you see in tons of YouTube videos, right? The thumbnails always say like big, catchy hooks. And if you listen to the charts, a lot of songs, especially if you listen to R&B and all that kind of music, have really kind of unremarkable choruses in a way. They're more about relaxing. They're kind of like, it's kind of like the difference between a movie and a series, right? A movie is like, has to cram a lot of stuff into 1.5 hours, whereas a series has a little bit more time, and therefore the beats are, a little bit further apart. And that's kind of what modern R&B music feels to me as well, is that on an entire R&B album, you get like 1 or 2 really big peaks, and the rest is typically like just really relaxing songs like that, So I feel like that's a kind of a new thing that's really happening right now. Also, we got those down choruses that Max Martin's team is trying really hard to push through with, Taylor Swift's latest album, and I'm seeing in a couple of other new albums where the chorus is kind of like the lowest energy part of the entire song. So that's something, I guess, that's happening a lot. Although those kind of songs, like Taylor Swift still has, huge dynamic energy curves. So that's maybe not the best example. But, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of songs that just like, that are a little bit more lyric driven now, I think. So lyrics are kind of, I wouldn't say a revival, but there's a couple of songs that fall more into that folk Ed Sheeran kind of vein, where the melody maybe isn't quite as important, where there's a little bit more lyrics. So it's not like Halo by Beyonce, where you just have one word for the chorus. There's a lot of lyrics for the chorus. So Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran being examples of this, both coming from folk or country, which are text-heavy genres. And so for those kind of genres, typically the chorus doesn't feel like super hyper. Whereas if you want that really hyper kind of chorus, then it's typically better to stick with with fewer words. All right, what else we got? How do you make connections with other musicians beside holistic songwriting, says Blue and Me? That's a good question. I think for me, it always just kind of happened. I mean, I have a lot of friends just going to conservatory, and that's one of the things that I think conservatory was really valuable for, is to meet a lot of people. And I go to like conventions, and I don't know, like a lot of people add me on Facebook now, like beside holistic songwriting, you said, obviously, but like I get a lot of requests and emails through holistic songwriting, and some of them quite interesting. So that's how I made some musicians, I make a habit of, whenever I visit a bigger city in the world, like a capital, I kind of do a meet and greet to meet some new people. So that's something I really like doing. It's just kind of being open to it, and just, going to a party can sometimes be really valuable as well. Just talking to everyone and just kind of figuring out what it is that they do. And, since I studied music, a lot of the people that I did hang out with at parties were musicians themselves. So that really helped for sure. By the way, Blue and Me, did you get accepted into conservatory? Because you wrote me last time that, you still weren't certain whether that would work out. Did that work out? I don't want to put you on the spot. This is a really bad idea, probably. But if you have a success story to tell, that would be great. Any tips on more memorable memories, says Anderson the Fourth. Let's see. Memorable memories. Melodies. Memorable memories. That would be a good chapter. Melodies, if you want your melodies to be more memorable, I think the most important thing is just repetition. I mean, that's really straightforward. Playing it simple. Don't go too far. Man, this is so basic. But that's really the most important thing, unfortunately. If you have like a little idea of like 3 or 4 notes, and you keep repeating that with little alterations, that's pretty much your best bet. I mean, that's what all the big songwriters are doing. And someone like Sia or Maroon 5, listen to their songs, man. Just listen to how they construct their melodies. And it's like A, like 3 times the same thing pretty much, with maybe really tiny alterations, and then maybe something a little bit new, or maybe it's A, B, but there's so much repetition in those songs, and that's kind of why they stick so well, just because we've heard them so many times. Okay, so this is a question I don't really understand. Soul Rhythm says, how do you structure lyrics for the given drum groove to create a new groove such as a polyrhythm? Structure lyrics, lyrical structure. Like I think this is where probably the vocabulary is a little bit askew with the two of us. So you mean, how do you write lyrics to a drum groove to create a new groove such as a polyrhythm? Well, I think that's the only way to really do it, right? There's some artists that just like follow the groove. So if the groove is 8th notes and they just hit the exact same beats, I think the best way to do it is especially if you're like into hip hop and stuff like that, which it sounds like you might. I think the most interesting thing to do is to actually go against the groove, and that's something I always try to do with my lyrics, is to find rhythms that kind of go between everything that's already there. And that has 2 functions. First of all, it's a little bit more unique, I think, and secondly, everything else kind of stays out of the way of the vocals that way, and that makes my mixing and my arranging job a lot easier. If everything has its own space rhythmically, that makes my whole job a little bit easier to get my message across, if that makes sense. Oh, I have a weird question. I saw just that. Let's see. I have a weird question. Where is it? How do you successfully blend styles? Like when you collaborate with an artist from a whole nother genre, like say like R&B and punk, how do you attack situations like that? R&B and punk that's a difficult example. I mean, it's not so difficult if you go, R&B and punk would be really tricky. There's a couple of albums that I can think of that have accomplished this really well, like Me First and the Gimme Gimmes had a couple of albums, and one of them was called, oh man, they had an R&B album for sure, and that was basically a cover album of really famous tunes, and they turned them into punk songs. So it's the melodies from the R&B songs, but it's an arrangement with a punk band. And that worked really well, but it still sounds more like punk than R&B. So if you want that R&B aspect to be a little bit more, I guess I would find where the two genres kind of cross. Like, what's the thing that both have in common? The thing is, with R&B and punk, why I think it's going to be difficult is punk I see as this really nasty, chaotic, like it's against everything, right? It's like you're trying to destroy the status quo. Everything that you're supposed to do, you're trying to like rip apart in a way. So that's kind of like original punk. If you have American punk, that's a little bit different, sure. I mean, that's more like rock with pop influences, I guess. And in that way, what has that got? I mean, the thing is, it still has to kind of feel raw, powerful, and fun. To me, punk is fun. So the American punk, fun, powerful, and fast. Whereas R&B to me is like slow, emotional, and sexy. And those are all of those things separate those two genres quite well, I think. But you would have to find a way, if you want to find a way to cross those two genres, what you would have to find is a crossover in emotion. So for example, when you want to cross over jazz and metal, for example, right? Which seems really difficult at first, and it is. But one thing that that's how I found my way into jazz. I was always a big metalhead when I was a teenager. How I managed to like jazz music was when I first heard My Favorite Things by Coltrane. There's a live recording of him playing on some TV show, I think, which is just absolutely amazing. And then I heard the live version of that in Tokyo, I believe. It's live in Tokyo. I think the whole album is called My Favorite Things Live in Tokyo. And there he just tears that song to shreds. Like he's really like, man, he's ripping it a new one. He destroys that song on stage. Like man, that shit is just so postmodern. It's like, it's freaking me out, and I love it. I think it's one of the most incredible performances of music that I've ever heard. And when I heard that, I was like, that is what I love about metal. And this guy's doing it with a jazz song. It's so aggressive. It's so, it's got this like tense kind of gear grinding kind of sound. And that's exactly what I loved about metal all along. So that was when I realized, like, oh, hey, there's a crossover here. And that's, I think, where those two genres can meet. And maybe we can turn that into something. And I did write like one or two songs, I think, doing that. And I mean, there's a couple of bands who did something like that as well. Thinking of Opeth. There's always bands that manage to do those crossovers. I think R&B and punk is going to be challenging, but it certainly is possible. So that's what I would start with, is find those crossovers in emotion. All right, what else we got? Happy Ron says, welcome back. Missed these Q&As. Makes Happy Ron happy. Good to hear, Happy Ron. Maybe have so Totally Overrated says, maybe have an R&B like breakdown in the punk song. Would be odd, but could work. Or R&B like vocals. Well, the R&B like vocals is kind of what Me First and the Gimme Gimmes did, and it still sounds like punk just because the arrangement is so punky. Eric Ross says, if I just have 4 notes, how do I figure out what scale of key they are in? Is there a tool for this? The easiest thing you could probably do is just go on a forum online, ask people, like, I have these 4 notes. If you tell us the notes right now, we could probably figure it out. Or someone else could figure it out for you here in the chat. So maybe you guys help Totally Overrated out if possible. Hey, Kai Ellis just donated $1. Thanks so much, Kai. Highly appreciate it. Did you also ask a question? I can't really see. I don't think you did. Did you? All right. Soul Rhythm says, is there a word for that? What would you call that? To make a groove that goes against. I don't know. Cross groove is what I've kind of been calling it, I guess. It's polyrhythm to a certain extent, but that's like a subgenre of cross beats to me. All right, what else? Could you do something on Avicii's melodies and production? Says Leo. Well, the thing is with Avicii, like, he has got a bunch of stuff on YouTube already. Like, he has 1.5 hour breakdowns of him taking apart his productions on YouTube. And I wanted to do Avicii, but then I saw all of those videos and I was like, well, what's the point? Like, he's already putting it out there like that, you know? I mean, I could have done like an image breakdown, but I kind of always want to put in a little bit of like the music creation process into the videos as well. So I felt like that was already covered in all of those videos, so I didn't really think it would really add anything to the site. Kai Ellis says, thoughts on why some great artists become so meh, like the bands Bush and Collective Soul. Both had a string of albums full of hits, but the last 10 years, lots of songs, nothing to love. I'm actually a really big fan of Bush from the early days, like Glycerine, and that whole album, Letting the Cable Sleep, is one of my absolute favorite songs of all time. So I feel you, man. I don't really feel the new stuff that much. I guess it's a lot of times I think what happened is that some of these bands missed the transition from analog recording to digital recording. And some bands, I think, have lost their sound through that transition. And that goes for a lot of producers as well, coincidentally. And I think maybe Bush had that same kind of problem. Like, if you have that possibility to make everything perfect because you have the power of a, electronic DAW, of a digital DAW, digital audio workstation, that is, then I think you take that chance. You just make everything perfect. And that way it loses a lot of what it originally had. There's only very few bands, I think, that have managed to sustain their sound through that change. For example, the Deftones, I've always felt like managed to keep their original sound that they had on their very first album. And it's really mostly in the performance. Like there's some things that they just never changed, like the slightly detuned guitars, or like the like the kind of bends and stuff like that, and those really low strings that kind of create a sort of like frequency of their own to like add that little bit of detuning. And Chino's vocals have always been a little bit messed up, and that's just always like kind of helped them push through into the modern age, I feel, because even if you produce them really well, they're still going to have that edge to their sound. But I think with a lot of these other bands, if you overproduce them, and that's pretty much what's happened, I think a lot of them lose their authenticity and a lot of them lose their power. I remember seeing a band called Shinedown, I believe, at a festival, and I was like, wow, this was amazing. This was like the coolest gig I've ever seen. And I wanted to like, I remembered like one song that I really loved, and I wanted to get it, and I checked it out on YouTube, and I hated it because it was so clean and so boring. I just really thought like, oh wow, this is, they sounded so great live. Like I really, really dig them live. But this just didn't work for me. And there were a couple of instances with other bands that I used to really, really love, especially in the rock genre, that just kind of didn't take the digital transition that well. All right. How can a soprano opera voice fit into a pop song? Says, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that because this like Cyrillic letters, I think. I did that once. How did I do that? Well, it was more like a flavor though. And actually, since we're talking about the Deftones, there is a Deftones song called Knife Party, like the artist Knife Party, where you get like this operatic voice in the end of the song, but that's more like a metal song. But I think they're doing it really well. So that's something I would look at, even if it's not really pop, but I think they're doing it really well. So as a flavor in the background, that's kind of how that works. And then, like you get Within Temptation and all those bands, obviously. Evanescence kind of had a little bit of an operatic voice. And there's so many others, like Celine Dion, obviously, is something I would listen to. Yeah, I mean, it depends. You could also listen to musicals, because those are often like really classically trained singers with that big voice, that kind of operatic voice. So that's something I'd listen to if I were you. Yeah. Madi says, I'm not a native English speaker, so is it harder for us to write songs in English even though we know English? I know your native language is German. That is why I ask. I don't know. There's pros and cons to this, I think, to not being a native speaker. I find writing in English so much easier than writing in German. And that's mostly because if I write something in German, I'm like, well, that sounds stupid. And the same thing happened to Swedish people. I think that's why Swedish music was so popular for a long time, and still is, of course, is because they just didn't think so much about their lyrics, and they just wrote something, and it was just out there. And it was more about the music than it was about the lyrics. I really don't think lyrics are that important in modern pop music. I mean, there's a little bit of a rise at the moment, so I don't know where that's going to go. So maybe lyrics are going to be super important again in 2 or 3 years, or maybe this year even. But I think it can be easier if you're writing in another language, because you can hide behind that other language. You know what I mean? So I find writing lyrics in English easier, because if I write in German, I'm always like, oh, I wouldn't say that. That sounds weird, or whatever. That kind of thing. Whereas when I write in English, I just don't know any better, and I just pick the one thing that. That's the way that I would say it, so that makes things a little bit easier for me when I write in English. So it's got its pros and cons. Obviously, you have to put a lot of work into it first, like in the front end, to get to that level where you can just kind of write what you want to write. But once you know the vocabulary, and once you know the grammar and all that stuff, and once your English is good enough, and that's the pronunciation is a big part of being a good songwriter, I think, is making sure the pronunciation in your videos, in your songs, is good. And that's something I find quite challenging with some of my artists, because a lot of them have German accents, and it is often a challenge to make sure that everything sounds as it should. Okay. All right. Eric Ross said D, E, F sharp, A. So that's probably D major, right? Or it could be anything. It could be A Dorian. Right? I mean, it's hard to say. but it's probably D major, D major, yes, since those are like some very, D, E, F sharp, A. That's the 1, 2, and 3 and 5 of D major. So I guess it's not A minor. Maxim Nakaev said it's A minor. The F sharp doesn't appear in A minor unless you're playing a Dorian. In that case, it's fine. Red Plant Production says, I don't know if you read it, but can you say a bit about the hook checklist? Well, the hook checklist is it is what it's called. It's a checklist of 7 things that I go through when I rewrite my melodies. So if I have a melody, if someone gives me a melody that they've written, or if I have like a first draft of a melody, those are the 7 steps I go through to make my melody better. And it's kind of the same process every single time, because I just know those are the 7 things I want to make sure my song has, and then I just go through those 7 points and to make my melody a little bit better. So that's kind of what it is. Blue and Me says, I'm planning on buying a microphone to record my demo album. I won't use it for the final production. Do you have a recommendation for one that is under $500 and working for voice and guitar? Well, you don't have to spend $500 if it's just for a demo recording. I think a really fine microphone is Rhodes NT1A, which comes in like a bundle as well with that spider thing and the pop filter, it's a really good microphone. My girlfriend has it. I have it. A lot of people buy it as their first microphone. It's just a really good one. So yeah, that's probably the one I would go with. And I think it makes sense to first start with a small microphone, and it's a good microphone, right? It's all right. And the next microphone you should buy, I think, should be like top end microphone. So go from like an NT1A to like a really great microphone. That should be your next step, because buying anything in between is just going to be a temporary solution. It doesn't really make sense in my book. So that's what I think. Do you have any advice for trying to write a concept album, says Drake Burnett? Well, I'm actually working on a concept EP at the moment. So a little bit. I think it's a lot about thinking about what you want to do before you start writing. A lot of times when you start writing songs, you just start writing and see what comes out, and you just kind of combine elements until you have something that sounds barely finished. Whereas with a concept album, you kind of want to put in a little bit of pre-work before you start writing your very first thing, in terms of like, what's the story going to be on this album? Like, for example, for my EP, I know that the first song I want to be like totally over the top. Second one, I want to be like sort of the pop song of the album. Third song, I want to show a kind of like different side of me, and the fourth song I want to be a ballad, to kind of sort of like have a little bit of a story there, right? So that's already part of the concept for me, is like, I know that's going to be the story that I want to tell. I'm not just going to write 4 pop songs and later decide what the order is of them. I already know what the order is going to be. Now I just have to write those songs. Does that make sense? Also, don't overthink it. Don't write the whole song in your head and then just start actually writing it. I think a lot of the times we fool ourselves into thinking that we can logically think through the songwriting process, when typically it's better to just start writing. So don't spend too much time on your concept. Have like a few ideas, a few things that you want to do, like some basic things, maybe a lyrical theme that you could use or something like that. Or maybe you have the idea of having like a little melodic fragment that you like bring back in every song or something like that. If you have a basic idea like that, that's something that can work really well with concept albums. If you're overthinking it too much, if you're saying like, okay, so the second one has to be able to be played in front of the first one, and it's like a riddle, and if you combine the second one with the fourth one, frequencies appear that weren't there before, and if you listen to it like this, a new song emerges. If you're thinking about that, it's probably a little bit too complicated, and it's going to limit you in your creativity. And eventually you want to just write a good album, right? So don't let it limit you in your creativity, is what I'm saying. All right. Tom Madness says D, F sharp, A, and E is D add 9. That's true, but he was asking for the key, not for the chord. What do you think is your best book for making music sound professional? I mean, I only have one book, The Addiction Formula, or did you mean a book that I bought somewhere? And in that case, I don't know what it's called. I mean, I read so many books on music production that I honestly forgot what it's called. I just read it like last summer. That was the best one that I've ever read. But it was a German one, so I'm not sure if it would help you, unfortunately. One of the few good German books on music production. I read another one that same summer, and it was horrible. It was so analytical, and it was just numbers over numbers and frequencies. It was so boring. Very German that way. Okay. Let's do 2 more questions. That's a good one. That's amazing. 7189 says, can you share one of your complete Logic Pro projects for one of your songs? I don't know if I'm going to share it, but I could definitely do a screen share of like showing you how I put the song together. That's definitely something I could do. That's a really good idea. Oh, wow. We got another donation over $10, 10 pounds even, from HK. And it's, okay, so very good. So third last question. How would you go about adding an interesting drum track to a ballad without it sounding sedated? Thanks. Well, thanks so much for that donation, HK. Let me think about it. One of the things, so first of all, ballads have really changed. If you want to write something, can you clarify real quick? Are you looking to write a really modern ballad, like something like XO by Beyonce, or like an R&B really modern ballad, or are you looking for something more, a little bit more old-fashioned, say like the older, what's that song by Beyonce that she, like her huge power ballad, Listen? Is that what it's called? Listen by Beyonce? Are you looking to do something like that, or something super modern? What's your take on this? Or, you know, is it Celine Dion or XO by Beyonce? Until I get your answer, I'm just going to look at some other questions. Any advice on growing your YouTube channel, says Dovidas? Yes, put out some really good stuff. Put a lot of work into your videos, and it will pay off. I spent 2 months on my very first video of the artist series. That was a lot of work, but it did pay off, as you can see. It's a little more powery, says HK. Right, so a little bit more poweries. All right. So I guess for the drums, I mean, then I'm thinking just of something like Love Me Like You Do by, oh God, what's her name? Oh man, I forgot what, you know, Love Me Like You Do, right? Super famous song, Love Me Like You Do. Let me just, it is by Ellie Goulding, of course. How could I not know this? That's something I would look at, like with those kind of dubstep kind of drums. There's also the song that I thought was going to win at the ESC 2 years ago, Sound of Silence. I forgot what the woman was called who sang it, but just type in European Song Contest, Sound of Silence. That also had kind of like those big dubstep like kind of drums for a really slow kind of song. Also, obviously, Sia's stuff is really good in terms of the drums. That's kind of what I would look at, I guess. Does that answer your question, or anything more specific? An interesting drum track. The thing is, for ballads, you kind of want to, you don't want to do too much, you know? You just want to have like bass and snare and maybe a little bit of something else. But the less you put in, I think the better it's going to be, because the focus shouldn't be on the drums. The drums, that's, you know, when I went to conservatory, all of our musicians always complained about having to play ballads because they're super boring to play on instruments. It's really to show off the talents of the singer. That's what it's really about, and that's what your focus should be on. So don't spend too much time on writing a super complex drum track, because I think it's going to detract from what's important in your song. Sarin Kuruvilla spent $3, which is super nice. Thank you, Sarin. Sarin? Happy Ron says, another sale on your products? Not anytime soon. Nope. Sorry. Ellie Goulding. Yeah. Right. 3 people knew better than me. Okay, so let's do, what did I say? One more question. That's an instrument. Okay. HK says, should I use an acoustic guitar rhythm guide, then take it out later? That's possible. I haven't done anything like that. I've done stuff where I took like a stem from another pop song, put it into my track, like a drum track or something like that, just for the sake of like finding some chords and stuff like that. And then I would take out that drum track again and write my own. I've done that. I've also, for electronic tracks, I've also worked with dummy vocals where I just dragged in some vocals from another track, just for the sake of like making sure I don't drown out the vocals once I add them later on, my own vocals. If you have some dummy vocals there, then it's easier to like write the rest of the music around that. It can also hinder you later on in your creativity, unfortunately, because if you already have a melody that, if you wrote the music to that one melody and it fits it perfectly, then it can be difficult to write something else. So make sure you don't write something that fits it too well, because obviously you're going to have to exchange it in order to not get any problems with copyright. So good. Davida says, stay gefährlich. Cool. All right. Stay gefährlich, guys. And Tom Madness said very nicely, for being German, your English is super fluid and natural. Thank you so much. Do you have tips to organize the lyrics? Okay, so I think that was it. All right, guys, it was super fun talking to you all. Let's move over to the final screen here. This is me with 4 hands and pointing towards different things on the screen. First of all is downloading free stuff on my website. If you go there, blog.holistic-songwriting.com, you can download a bunch of free things that are all awesome, that are all going to help you in your songwriting. Down here, we have, on that same page, you can take one of my pro courses, and a new one is coming out very shortly, as I said. You can also subscribe and follow on Facebook and Twitter, and there's a hand that's empty. That's all. Guys, take care. Cheers. Thanks for being here.